Monique Ryan, thanks for joining us. The delegation you're a part of has met with representatives of the Department of Justice, the State Department and others. What do you think you've achieved so far there in Washington?
Look, it's been an extraordinary day, actually, David. So, as well as Department of State, Department of Justice, we've met with Julian Assange's lawyers, both from the UK and Australia, with representatives from the Australian Embassy and with a couple of representatives from the US Congress, that being Rand Paul, Senator Paul, and Congressman Thomas Massey. And what we've done is, on each occasion, we've impressed upon the individuals we've met with the consensus that we as a group have achieved, but also the consensus that many Australian parliamentarians have come to, which is that it's time to have Julian Assange released and brought home. And the thing that I think that the Americans we've spoken with have not appreciated previously is how strongly Australians feel about this. Well,
do you think that strength of feeling in Australia and that stronger political consensus in support of Julian Assange is going to ultimately make a difference?
I do. I really do. I feel that it really will. And what we were advocating for today is that for Julian Assange to be home by Christmas. We know that he has a wife and 2 small children, and we've been telling the Americans that we believe that this needs to happen. Now, our feeling is that his prosecution is a political process. It's not one that's based on law or on the proper judicial process. This is a political case. The charges are political and the means to resolving them is via politics. And so what we are hoping to do is to lay the groundwork for the Prime Minister when he comes to the States later in the year, in about a month, to meet with President Biden and basically communicate the same thing that we've been saying today and the message that we've been hearing from our electorates, that it's time for this process to be brought to a close. And we do hope that the US government will be open to that suggestion.
You've said this is a political matter, but President Biden insists the Justice Department is independent, whether it's the action being taken against Donald Trump or Julian Assange. He does not want the appearance of any political interference. So what makes you say this is a political matter, not an independent matter for the Justice Department?
Well, I think if we took it back to the Justice Department, and one of the things, I can't speak to the details of the discussion we had today because they were under Chatham House rules, but one of the things that we talked about was public interest. And so both in Australia and in the US, any prosecution that is undertaken has to take into account public interest. And our argument was that in many respects, public interest in this case would be better served by ending the extradition proceedings, dropping the charges and allowing the whole case to come to a natural end. It would be the right thing for Julian Assange, it would be the right thing for the relations between Australia and the US, but it would also be the right thing in terms of international justice and the potential repercussions of this legal case on the freedom of the press, both in the US and internationally.
When he was recently in Australia, the US Secretary of State said it was very important for Australians to understand the level of US concern. He said Mr Assange was, and I quote, charged with very serious criminal conduct in connection with his alleged role in one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the country. Those comments really suggested there'd been no softening of the Biden administration's view on this matter. Is that a similar tone that you've picked up on in Washington, or have you picked up something different?
Well, the comments that Secretary of State Blinken made earlier this year, which were unfortunate and I think really disappointing to many people who have concerns about this case, were at odds with what Ambassador Kennedy has said, which has reflected a relative softening of the attitude of the American government. And we hope that that Secretary Blinken's comments were perhaps a little bit more hardline than other members of the government. It's hard to be sure about that.
Do you think Julian Assange should seek a plea deal?
I think it's important to bring Julian Assange home to Australia. I don't think it's appropriate for me or other members of this delegation or for his lawyers or the people engaged in the discussions and negotiations which are going on at the moment to discuss in any detail how that should be facilitated.
Is this case a test of the US-Australia alliance?
We have a very, very close relationship. There are not many points of difference internationally between Australia and the US, but this is one which could become increasingly problematic with time. I think my feeling is, and other members of the delegation feel the same way, that Julian Assange's extradition from the United Kingdom to the US to face these charges would be immediately an issue for Australians, and it would become more of an issue over time as that court case, were the case to go to court, played out. Because what we would be seeing, well, there's a number of things that we would be seeing. It would be a problem for the US because all of the transcripts of the data which he published would be revisited. The vision of the videos that he published would be revisited, and they don't look good for the US government, let's face it.
Finally, this is an unusual delegation you're a part of. We don't often see the likes of yourself, Barnaby Joyce, Alex Antic, Greens and Labor MPs all teaming up together on, well, anything. What's that been like?
I think Julian Assange must be an extraordinary human being, because if anyone can bring Barnaby Joyce and Alex Antic and I around a table in furious agreement about anything, it speaks to the power of Assange's personality and impact. Look, we all got together last night for the first time. We all sort of came together in Washington for the first time, and we've all been really respectful of each other. I think we all acknowledge the fact that we are a somewhat motley crew. I keep waiting for the theme song of The Odd Couple to start playing every time Barnaby and I have a conversation. But we're human beings, but we're also, we're reasonable people, and it would be a great shame if we weren't able to work productively together about something that matters to us.
Monique Ryan, thanks for joining us.
That's a pleasure, David. Thank you.